Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, the most somber day in the Jewish calendar. And Justin Trudeau thought he'd show the Jews what he thought of them by inviting an actual SS Nazi officer to Parliament. Here, take a look at how Yaroslav Hunka, now 98 years old, and a proud and unrepentant member of Hitler's 14th Waffen-SS Division Galicia. Look at this.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian-Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
That's quite a careful way to describe someone, isn't it? A Ukrainian-Canadian war veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians, and a Ukrainian hero and a Canadian hero. That sort of leaves out a few details, doesn't it? But if anyone knows even the most basic facts about the Second World War, they might recall that in the final half of that war, we were actually allies with the Soviet Union, and that Stalin's Red Army bore the brunt of the casualties and conquered Berlin. I'm not saying that Stalin or the Soviets or the Red Army even were good. They were deeply evil institutions, and Stalin murdered as many or more people than Hitler did and had a much longer reign of terror. But if we're talking about the Second World War and veterans, fighting against the Russians pretty much meant you were with the Nazis, which is what Yaroslav Hunka did. This is him as a young man. Understand, I'm not saying that he was a regular soldier. He's not just some conscript. There were millions of men who served in the German Wehrmacht as conscripts. They were not war criminals merely by virtue of serving the German army. But what Yaroslav Hunka did was something different. He was a Ukrainian who positively volunteered to join Hitler's SS. That was the political, ideological, pointy end of the spear for Hitler's final solution. Those are the most brutal of Hitler's soldiers, the ones who rounded up the local resistance fighter, the one who hunted for hidden Jews in the attics, the ones who could be counted on to do the shootings of civilians and the dumping of bodies in mass graves. That's what the 14th Waffen Battalion did. That's who Yaroslav Hunka was. Look at this. Here's a fascinating story about Hunka's battalion, written a few years ago by David Pugliese, Canada's leading military journalist and historian. He writes occasionally for the Ottawa Citizen, too. This was published in Esprit de Corps magazine, a military magazine. The headline is, "The RCAF officer who brought Hitler's Waffen-SS to Canada." It's written a few years ago. Here's a few passages. Those who served in the 14th Waffen-SS Division Galicia had taken an oath to Hitler and had received education in Nazi doctrine. Ukrainian officers had been trained at SS facilities in the Dachau concentration camp. Seemed like nice guys. So how did he get into Canada? Well, a lot of Nazis sneaked out of Germany at the end of the war. Many went to South America. 2,000 came to Canada from this battalion here. In an attempt to hide the SS connection, the unit had changed its name in the last few days of the war to the 1st Division Ukrainian National Army. So this guy, Yaroslav Hunka, has been living in Canada for about 70 years, keeping a very low profile. I don't know, maybe hoping that no Mossad Nazi hunters would find him and kidnap him and take him to Israel for a trial, as they had with other Nazis like Adolf Eichmann, found hiding in South America. So Yaroslav Hunka lives a free and happy life in Canada, small town. He's never charged with any war crimes. He never gets into any trouble. And then one day, he's 98 years old now, he gets invited to Parliament as a hero, introduced as a hero. And look at that cheer. Take a look at this.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
That is the look of relief and that wiping the brow, and that's vindication, that's redemption. They love him. They don't hate him. He's not a war criminal or a pariah. He's a hero. They said it. Everyone cheered him. He was so proud. And his daughter-in-law and son, who accompanied him to Ottawa for the big day, they were so proud. Finally, they could be proud of Grandpa and what he did. And look at that. He's waiting for a reception with Trudeau and Zelensky. So all that happened on Friday. But I was honestly more distracted by the protesters shouting things outside the hotel where Zelensky was speaking.
There he is, Zelensky. Go home.
Get out of our country, Zelensky! Get out of our country! Pay for your fucking war!
I was also distracted by this shouty speech that Trudeau gave from inside the hotel that actually seemed a bit unhinged to me, to be candid. A bit off-brand for Mr. Sunny Ways, a little bit off-brand for Canada the honest broker, Canada the peacemaker, the peacekeeper. What do you think of this? It's just an excerpt from Trudeau's speech.
To continue to step up as Canada has with close to $9 billion in aid for Ukraine. But we will, because the cost on Canadians, on our lives, on our world will be so much greater if Putin wins this war that we will and have to stand every single day until Ukraine wins this war. The stakes are high for Canadians. The stakes are high for Ukrainians. The stakes are high for all of us around the world. This is a moment where we define ourselves for the rest of the 21st century. Did we stand up against authoritarianism? Did we stand up against those who choose to break the rules around the world? Do we stand up for what is right? We are Canadian. Of course we're going to stand up for what's right.
That felt a little odd to me. Did it feel a little odd to you? So that's what I was thinking about after the Parliament event and after Trudeau's speech. I really didn't even notice this Hunka thing, but by Saturday I started looking at it because I saw this photo captioned by the Canadian press. And it says, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recognized Yaroslav Hunka, who was in attendance and fought with the 1st Ukrainian Division in the Second World War before later immigrating to Canada, in the House of Commons on Friday. So that was more information than the Speaker of the House introduced, isn't it? But like David Pugliese, the historian points out, that 1st Ukrainian Battalion, that was the sneaky fake name that the Nazis gave themselves so they could slip into Canada. Those are the Waffen-SS Nazi guys. But I guess no one at the Canadian press or the Canadian Parliament or the Canadian media or the Canadian establishment at all noticed. Although CP seemed to get their facts right. Look again, the guys right next to Hunka were literally senior military officers. Did none of them know that the Waffen-SS actually slaughtered Allied soldiers, as well as Jews and Poles and anyone else Hitler hated? There's no way that Trudeau didn't vet him. This was an ultra-high security event. Trudeau was there. Every MP was there. Zelensky was there. Everyone was vetted for security. When even a doorman at the hotel reached out to shake Zelensky's hand, his hand was swatted away by security. And fair enough, right? Nothing was left to chance, right? Don't tell me that Yaroslav Hunka just slipped into Parliament like he slipped into Canada with no one watching. They knew who he was. Absolutely, they knew. The Speaker of the House did. Trudeau and his staff did. Likely Zelensky's staff did too. Don't pretend that you can just bring in someone off the street at an event like that. Notice the speaker himself was reading prepared remarks when he introduced him. It seemed written by someone else. I bet 25 people knew. From protocol officers to communications officers to political officers to security. Don't lie to me and tell me no one knew. But why did Trudeau think he could get away with it? Well, because he has been getting away with it. Back in June, just a few months ago, Trudeau went to Kiev and he met with a real-deal Holocaust denier who proudly tweeted of their visit. That guy, Andrei Melnik, was so odious that even Zelensky himself fired him as the Ukrainian ambassador because he was so toxic. He would go on TV and just deny the Holocaust like this.
Das, was du
mehrere
nennst.
Massaker an Polen in der Westukraine durchgeführt von den
Ja,
Bandera.
und es gab auch auf gleiche Weise die gleichen Massaker der Polen gegenüber der Ukraine. Auch Zehntausende
Macht ja
Ukrainer,
nichts besser.
Zehntausende Ukrainer wurden, das war ein Krieg. Und deswegen, das wollen jetzt die Polen, also diese Geschichte politisieren. Wir sind dagegen.
Aber hat Israel Unrecht? Israel, der Staat Israel,
Ja,
das
wir haben-
800.000
ja.
Juden auch von Banderas Truppen
Also
und Bandera
Israel,
Denken
was
Sie
heißt,
sich das aus?
ich weiß nicht, was sie sich ausdenken, aber wir reden über Bandera, ja? Und wir reden über
Die
Bandera.
ganze Welt erkennt an, dass Bandera an der Ermordung von 100.000 Juden beteiligt ist.
Nein, das stimmt
Außer
nicht.
die Ukraine.
Es gibt keine Belege, dass Bandera-Truppen Hunderttausende Juden ermordet haben. Es gibt keine Belege. Das ist diese Narrative, dass die Russen bis heute durchsetzen und das in Deutschland und auch in Polen und in Israel auch Unterstützung
Denken
findet.
sich die jüdischen Gemeinden das alle aus?
Ich weiß nicht, woher sie diese Daten nehmen, aber ich bin bereit, auch mit den jüdischen Gemeinden darüber sachlich zu reden, wenn sie wirklich nicht nur das wiederholen, was wir seit Jahrzehnten hören. Bandera ist...
Es gab Flugblätter, als die Deutschen reingekommen sind nach
Ja.
Lviv. Da hieß es, Volk, das musst du wissen, Moskowiten, Polen, Ungarn und Juden, sie sind deine Feinde, vernichte sie, das musst du wissen, deine Führung, dein Führer Stepan Bandera.
Was für Flugblätter?
Als die Deutschen gerade einmarschiert sind, da haben sie quasi an die Bevölkerung das verteilt, die ja noch unter anderer Herrschaft dann da waren. Die haben sich ja mit den Deutschen verbrüdert. Das ist doch ganz klar.
Also...
Und ich frage mich halt, ich meine, ich verstehe...
Also ich werde
André.
dir heute nicht sagen, dass ich mich davon distanziere. Und das war's. Ja.
Das
war's.
ist ja deine Entscheidung. Ich
Ja,
frag
das
mich
ist meine
nur-
Entscheidung und das
ich
kannst du
frag-
nicht verstehen, aber weil
Ich verstehe nicht,
Ja.
wie man jemanden als Helden bezeichnen kann, der gleichzeitig Massenmörder von Juden und Polen war.
Bandera war kein Massenmörder von Juden und Polen. Er war kein Massenmörder.
Yeah, so Trudeau's hanging out with Andrei Melnik, and the media don't care, and the opposition doesn't care, so that's okay, right? I mean, if a guy can go full blackface and get away with it, why not? He's learning what he can get away with. I don't know if you remember, Chrystia Freeland posed with a scarf in the colors of Nazi leader Stepan Bandera. No problem, no mainstream media cared. Keep going, right? David Pugliese, the historian, had written about how Trudeau and Freeland were supporting anti-Semitic neo-Nazi groups like the Azov Battalion, giving them military training. And their main concern was keeping it a secret from the Canadian media. Here's the Ottawa Citizen article. That's a scandal. It actually was published in the Ottawa Citizen, but no one seemed to care. So why would they care if Trudeau brought a real live Nazi into Parliament? I mean, do you think Chrystia Freeland herself would care? I mean, her own grandfather was a Nazi. I'm not blaming her for what her grandpa did before she was born, but when she learned about it, she covered it up for years, claiming it was just Russian propaganda. No, it was real. So Trudeau and Freeland routinely call peaceful democratic political critics Nazis and far right and racists. Their critics are not Nazis, of course. They just disagree with them. It's Trudeau and Freeland who really do have the Nazi problem, and it's coming from inside their house, but they call everyone those names first. It's like Trudeau calling other people misogynists when he's actually the one who sexually assaulted Rose Knight. He calls you a racist. He's the one who wears blackface. As usual, if it's a report about Trudeau's misconduct, though, you'll read about it in the foreign press before you'll read about it, if ever, in Canada's news media, which has been colonized by Trudeau. So all these things happened on Friday. No coverage. No coverage on Saturday. But by Sunday, a left-wing Jewish daily forward, the first mainstream publication to cover this, reported on the Nazi link. Why did a New York-based newspaper beat every Canadian regime journalist? Now, it wasn't until Sunday. Well, you know why, don't you? You know, a masked agent provocateur unfurled a Nazi flag just long enough to be photographed at the trucker convoy, and that was enough for Canada's regime media to denounce 100,000 truckers as racist. Trudeau deliberately invites a Nazi soldier to Parliament, and crickets. It fell to independent journalists like me even to raise the alarm. I started tweeting about this on Saturday night, and my tweets were actually getting millions of views. I mean, this one alone had 3 million views. I remember I wrote it at like 1:30 a.m. on Saturday night. Now, I read, here's what I said. I said, I hope I'm wrong, but I think Trudeau and Zelensky just did something terrible. Let me explain it in reverse. Now, I was so shocked by what I had thought I had found about this guy, I was worried that I must have got something wrong. It was so crazy a story. No, I didn't get it wrong. It's just that every other mainstream journalist in the country who was covering the event either just missed it or didn't care or was in on it. So Sunday afternoon rolls around. The Jewish Daily Forward in New York had done a story about it. Our friend Joe Warmington of The Sun started poking around. And the speaker, finally, the Speaker of the House put out a press release claiming that it was him, only him, all him, nobody else. Nobody else, eh? You can just grab a stranger and bring him into Parliament with the highest security event of the year. Is that how it works? Same with this woman, Karina Gould, a cabinet minister who happens to be a Jew. Here she is with the Nazi officer. She quickly deleted this image and then claimed she knew nothing about the guy, never met him. Really? You liar. And today she said, shame on everyone for being so political about all this. Can you get a load of this?
I want to please ask all colleagues, particularly those in the Conservative Party of Canada, to make sure that we do not politicize this issue. I don't think it helps anybody. I think we need to make sure that we move forward, recognize this mistake, and stand in solidarity together to reiterate our commitment to Jewish Canadians, but also to Ukrainian Canadians and the people who are fighting for freedom, for peace, and for justice in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, stop being so political, you guys. You're causing the harm here. Stop being so political by calling people Nazis. Don't you know, it's just, it's facts when we call truckers Nazis, but it's too political when you call a Nazi a Nazi. Don't you know? And I'm going to use my concerned voice. Here's Karina Gould again in question period when she later admitted that absolutely this Nazi was vetted for security. Of course she was. She knew that she admits the government knew everything about him, but it's all the speaker's fault, don't you know?
Unfortunately, I think my honorable colleague has misinterpreted what I was saying. What I was saying and what you yourself indeed have said is that you invited this particular individual. You yourself decided to recognize this individual without informing either the government or the Ukrainian delegation that you would be doing this. When it comes to everyone that was invited to Parliament, of course that vetting happened. However, the decision to recognize an individual was that of the Speaker. And I would ask that the members opposite would please be respectful. This is a very difficult time for all of us. but I do ask them to stick to the facts and the issue at hand, which was the fact that this individual was invited by the Speaker and the decision to recognize by the Speaker, not by the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You know, these liberals lie, and they know they're lying, and they know that you know they're lying, but they lie anyways. I mean, it's totally normal for a liberal and a Jew to say this.
How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
That's my MP, believe it or not. That's normal. That's not politicizing things, but it's too political to call out finding an actual Nazi and bringing him to Parliament and cheering for him. Don't be so political. Well, the master manipulation, the grand poobah of gaslighting, saved his appearance for last. Look at this absolute masterpiece.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
Oh, he's somber, and he's upset. He's upset just like you. He's mad at the Speaker, just like you should be. Parliament and Canada have been humiliated. Not him, by the way. He wants to get to the bottom of it. Now, he's not particularly upset because he's certainly not to blame, but the Speaker's to blame, and those Russians are to blame. Beware of Russian disinformation. I mean, really. Did a Nazi even actually go to Parliament? Are you sure? Are you sure that's not Russian disinformation? We're all embarrassed and have to get to the bottom of this. And by even talking about what happened, aren't you being a Russian agent? What a disgrace Justin Trudeau is. What an international laughingstock he is. By the way, I note that from Trudeau on down, not a single member of the government has actually apologized for the Nazi. They blame the Speaker of the House, who has apologized and accepts responsibility, but he hasn't actually accepted responsibility, if that means doing anything like resigning or even firing a scapegoat, which is the usual Liberal way. He's just accepted responsibility and like just I checked the box. Here's Andrew Coyne, the prince of the media party, saying, well, that's good enough. Taking responsibility does not equal resigning. Always and everywhere, even in public life, it can mean that, but it does not necessarily or automatically. If everyone had to resign every time they screwed up, very few jobs would be filled, and none at all in the media. Hey guys, just because we literally invited, vetted, introduced, honored, and cheered a Nazi doesn't mean we have to actually do anything, because this could happen all the time. You just say sorry and that's enough. Here's his buddy, Bruce Arthur, the Toronto Star. The basic dynamic of Canadian politics right now is the Liberals celebrated a Nazi through incredible incompetence. 7 months after some Conservatives celebrated a Nazi completely on purpose. By that he means Christine Anderson, the German member of the European Parliament, who visited Canada a few months ago, except she's not a Nazi. As you know, it's illegal to be a Nazi in Germany. She'd be jailed if she really was a Nazi. It's actually the one place you can be sure she's not a Nazi, because she'd be in prison. She's just a conservative. So what Bruce Arthur has done is trivialize the Holocaust, because if a mere conservative member of the European Parliament, who he doesn't like, is no better than a Nazi, then a Nazi is no worse than her. So the Nazi in the SS brigade must not have been that bad. He's not any worse than a conservative politician. That's the Toronto Star for you. What a disgrace. But let me point out again, none of the Liberals have actually said this guy Hunka is a bad guy, because they're still trying to get those votes. The entire establishment let this go for 2 days. They all hoped no one would notice. So gross. Oh, and just so you know how sorry they all are, today the Liberals tried to get permission, unanimous consent, to delete and erase all records of their Nazi moment, Orwellian style.
I would like to ask for unanimous consent to adopt the following motion. That notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, the recognition made by the Speaker of the House of an individual present in the galleries during the joint address to Parliament by His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky be struck from the appendix of the House of Commons debates of Thursday, September 21st, 2023, and from any House multimedia recording. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It needed unanimous permission in Parliament, so it failed. They won't apologize. The only thing they're apologizing for is the embarrassment. They're not apologizing for the guy. They would rather delete the proof of it to make it nothing more than a rumor. What cowardly, manipulating Nazi lovers they are.